Hi, and welcome everyone to the 2024-2025 Rhode Island Humanities Grants Information Session. We're recording this in September 2024 with information for our upcoming grant making year. So thank you so much for joining us and for your interest in our program. My name is Julia Renaud. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the Associate Director of Grants and Humanities Initiatives. And I will be joined soon by a Grants and Humanities Initiatives coordinator on our staff who will also be available to help you. So you can reach the whole grants team at grants@rihumanities.org, and we encourage you to reach out. So thank you so much and welcome again. So today we're going to spend about an hour together. And first off, I'll give an introduction to Rhode Island Humanities. Then I'll share a brief overview of our grant opportunities for the upcoming year, including major and mini project grants and our Thrive General Operating Support grants. And then I'll go a bit more in depth into what those programs look like. So we'll talk about eligibility, timeline, and application process for both the major and mini project grant program and the Thrive General Operating Support Grant Program. We'll talk about if you need help preparing your application, the resources that we have available, and then if you do receive a Rhode Island Humanities grant, which we'd be very excited about, what you can expect next. So to get right into it, our mission at Rhode Island Humanities is that we seed, support, and strengthen public history, cultural heritage, civic education, and community engagement by and for all Rhode Islanders. So really, this is a blueprint for our grant-making program, which is fantastic to have in our mission statement. So you can see our philosophy there in terms of what we're doing with our grant making program. We're seeding and supporting and strengthening what we know already exists in communities all over the state, which is fabulous public humanities work. So it's really our role to uplift that and strengthen it. In terms of what we fund, this is a great place to start. It's not a comprehensive list, but public history, cultural heritage, civic education, community engagement, great place to start in terms of what we think about what we're funding. And then in terms of who our program is for, it's really by and for all Rhode Islanders. So we understand this is aspirational. We can always do better at it. We're always working to do better at it, but we really do see our program as by and for all Rhode Islanders. So a little bit more about us, our vision, and our values. I'm not going to read this whole vision statement. I invite you to do that, but I'll call out a few elements that are really pertinent to our grant-making program. So, we're active through our grant-making program. We're hoping to actively encourage Rhode Islanders to engage with the complexity of the state's history, current challenges, and future possibilities. We're committed to drawing in and amplifying many voices to explore historical and contemporary issues, as well as celebrate multifaceted perspectives and approaches. And through our grant-making program, as well as our other programs, we're seeking to inspire participation in community, promote conversation and difficult dialogues, and establish the basis for shared understanding that also acknowledges differences. And then in terms of our values, our core principles that guide how we act and what we do, those are relevance, collaboration, and community. So to share a little bit more specifically about the nuts and bolts of who we are, we were founded in 1973, so we celebrated our 50th anniversary last year, and we are a private 501c3 organization. So we are a nonprofit. We are our own independent nonprofit. However, we do have an affiliation with the National Endowment for the Humanities, which is a federal agency. And actually, Senator Claiborne Pell of Rhode Island was instrumental in the founding of that agency, along with the sister agency, the National Endowment for the Arts in 1965. So we do have that connection. However, just to confirm, we're not a government agency. We're not a state agency. We're not a federal agency. We're our own 501c3 nonprofit. We are one of 56 of these humanities councils throughout the US states and territories. So we have a lot of sibling councils, which is fantastic. And kind of, in a reflection of this status we have funding from both public and private sources. So we do receive federal funding, we receive state funding from Rhode Island, and we also have private funding from donors, foundation grants. So we apply for grants as well, sponsorships, etc. And our grant making programs we're talking about today are with public money, so with federal funding and with state funding. So to go a little bit more into that, in this fiscal year, FY25, we will have two major programs. Just to explain a little bit more, FY25, we have kind of a funny fiscal year because we follow the federal calendar. So our fiscal year is November 2024 to October 2025. So that's why we're kicking this off in September 2024 because we have the year to come starting in November. So our major and mini grant program that is federally funded, and the program supports public humanities projects with a clear connection to an impact in Rhode Island. And I'm going to talk more about what public humanities projects are. The program is open to both eligible individuals and entities or organizations. And there are 5 deadlines over the course of the year. So there are 4 mini grant deadlines that happen quarterly every 3 months, and 1 major grant deadline that happens annually. The maximum mini grant award is $2,000, and the maximum major grant award is $12,000. So our Thrive Grant program, that is funded with money from the state of Rhode Island, and the program supports organizational general operating support expenses. So different than the project grant program, major and mini grants, this is a general operating support program. It is only open to eligible organizations, so individuals cannot apply to Thrive, and there's only 1 deadline over the course of the year. And all awards are for $5,000, so there's no variation in the award amount for that program. So I'm going to go over a lot of details in the next hour, but not all of them. So I really encourage you to visit our website. That's where you can find everything you need to know. So we have 1 page for our major and mini grants, 1 page for our Thrive grants, and there you can find our updated major and mini grant guidelines document, which has every detail about that program, and our FAQs for our Thrive program, which has all those details. You can find reference PDFs of our applications and our reviewer materials, so you don't have to log into our grant portal to see those. You can find videos like this one of our information sessions. You can find links for any, sessions we're having where you can register. We're also summarize any updates we've made and more. So really, rihumanities.org and the grants pages on there are your best first resource for everything to do with our program. So to get a little bit more into major and mini grants, as I said, the funding is federal, and our fiscal year runs from November 2024 to October 2025. And our budget for that year, for this year, is $180,000. So over the whole major mini grant program. So the way that we have that roughly allocated, although things, can change, is we have about $32,000 reserved for mini grants. So that would be 16 mini grants of $2,000 each. So if we have 4 deadlines, you can imagine 4 grants per deadline. And then we have about $148,000 reserved for 12 to 15 major grants. And the reason there's that variation is because different applicants request different amounts. So, but if you kind of divide out 148,000 among that, the range of amounts requested, it's about 12 to 15, depending. So our program's competitiveness does vary from year to year. During the pandemic, it became a lot less competitive because fewer people were applying. And the last year, it became a lot more competitive. We saw a surge in our acceptance rate was about 25%. But when you kind of average that out over time, Usually we're in the range of a 35 to 50% acceptance rate, meaning that 35 to 50% of applications receive awards. Through our programs, we fund three types of project grants. So we fund research projects, public projects, and documentary film and media projects. So to talk a bit more about that, research projects, this will be a theme. We fund those that explore humanities content using humanities methods. And I will talk more about what that means. So research projects that we fund are typically driven by one or several key research questions that the applicant wants to investigate. Sometimes that research is part of a larger project, like a documentary film, and other times the research is the entire project. And in these kinds of projects, the majority of the time and the expenses are typically allocated to performing that research. We also fund public projects that explore humanities content using humanities methods. And really, this is kind of the biggest umbrella of what could be a public project, because there really are so many forms. But what they have in common is their focus on the humanities content and methods that I mentioned, and also real engagement with communities as co-creators, collaborators, partners, participants, and audience members. So public projects are typically focused on the creation of creating something in community that's engaging with that humanities content. Some examples are an event series, panel discussion, an exhibition, a podcast, a walking tour, a cultural festival, a website, and the list goes on. And I do suggest that you check out our recent grants page on our website also to see the kind of wide variety of things that we funded. But in these public projects, the majority of the time, the expenses are typically allocated to developing and implementing whatever that public-facing output is. And then documentary film and media projects, this is somewhat more self-explanatory, but we fund documentary film and media projects that explore humanities content using humanities methods. And we do fund documentary film and media projects in stages. You can check out page 6 of our major and mini grants guidelines for more details on that. But we have the first stage is a research level mini grant, as a research mini grant. The second phase is a script development level major grant, and the third phase is a production and post-production level major grant. So you could receive 3 grants sequentially over time for the same documentary film and media project. So again, check out the grant guidelines for more details on that, or reach out to us and we can talk to you more. So I know I've been throwing around all of these terms, so I wanted to go into them a little bit more. And just to share, there are a lot of answers to these questions. They're big questions. I'm going to share with you kind of how we at Rhode Island Humanities think about them, but of course it's an open dialogue. And I'll also say that the definitions I'm about to share are also in our major and mini grant guidelines starting on page 12. And so you can refer to those as well. So we think of the humanities as a collection of disciplines and practices focused on human thought, history, and culture. So that includes, and this isn't a comprehensive list, but it includes literature, history, philosophy, comparative religion, art history, cultural heritage, civics education, and more. And in terms of why we believe the humanities are important in the work they do, I think the National Humanities Center puts it well. They say humanities research adds to our knowledge of the world as scholars investigate differences between cultures and communities around the world and across time, consider the ways art is made and received, or unveil undercurrents that have shaped history. Humanities education encourages students to think creatively and critically, to reason, and ask questions. So when we talk about humanities content, we're really talking about topics in any of the disciplines and practices within the humanities. So again, pretty big umbrella. So some examples of humanities content would be the history of fishing in Point Judith, or cultural heritage of the French American community in Woonsocket, just to name a few. So, but really it's vast, right? And then in terms of humanities methods, these are the kind of methods and tools we use when we're practicing the humanities. So I'm going to give some examples. Again, it's not comprehensive, but it could be research on humanities content, close reading, documentation, investigation, interpretation, critical analysis, storytelling, contextualization, dialogue, discussion, and debate. So, kind of putting all this together, what are the public humanities then? So, we think of the public humanities as really what happens when people engage together with humanities content and methods outside of professional scholarly discourse. This can happen and be led by organizations, by communities, by individuals. And again, it can take many forms. It could be an exhibition documenting the history of a neighborhood, cultural heritage festival celebrating an ethnic community, a panel discussion on the historical context of a piece of theater, a documentary film examining a regional culture, a digital video series educating voters on the legislative process, and so on. But really, it's that engagement with humanities content and methods in community that we think of as public humanities. So in terms of going a little bit more into the differences between major and mini grants. So with major grants, we fund public projects and documentary film and media projects. And like I mentioned, the documentary film and media projects are at that script development and post-production stages. Like I mentioned, we get requests from $2,000 to $12,000 for this program. And depending on what phase you are in your project, there are different caps. So if for a public project, you're at the research planning and development phase, you can request up to $5,000. Same for the script development stage of a documentary film and media project. And if you're in the production and implementation or production and post-production stage of your project, you can request up to $12,000. I will note that only eligible organizations may apply for major grants. So like we said earlier, individuals cannot apply, but we do accept fiscal sponsorship, and which means that if you're an ineligible organization or an individual, you can partner with an eligible organization to apply. And I'll go over in a little bit who is eligible. And I'll also note that all grant-funded projects must be free, open, and accessible to the public in terms of the final thing that they create. So this is, again, federal money, and so we want all Rhode Islanders and taxpayers to be able to access what it funds. So in terms of the timeline, the process starts for major grants with a letter of intent. It's a bit of a misnomer. It's not actually a letter. It's a form that you fill out on our grant making portal, and it's pretty brief. Really, what we're trying to do with this is just establish that your project is eligible so you don't waste your time filling out a whole application for something we're not able to fund. So that will become available on our website on October 1st, and it's available through December 2nd. So you have 2 months to submit that. Once you submit it, we will respond within 2 weeks of submission. So you'll hear back from us. But the final date to submit that is December 2nd. And I'll also just note that anything you put on this form isn't binding. So if your project changes after you submit, or you decide you don't want to apply after all, that's totally fine. If it does change, we ask you reach out to us so we can make sure that the different, updated project is still eligible. But if you think you might want to apply for a major grant, definitely do submit it because you can't gain access to the application without submitting during this window. So just give yourself the option. Again, it's not binding, but it is required to get to that application stage. So for the full application, this is an optional deadline. If you do want feedback on an application draft from staff, we will happy to provide that. But you do need to share your draft with us by December 9th, and then we will get feedback back to you by December 10th. And then the full application is due by January 15th. And you'll hear back by March 20th, so about a 2-month turnaround there. So to talk a bit about mini grants now. So in terms of what kinds of projects we fund with mini grants, we fund research projects, including that first stage of documentary film and media projects, and as well as public projects. So as I mentioned before, requests are from $0, well, no one requests $0 up to 2,000. And both eligible individuals and organizations may apply for research projects as well as public projects, so open to both individuals and organizations as long as they're eligible. And like with our major grant program, all grant funded projects must be free, open, and accessible to the public. One exception is that if you are a documentary, film, and media research grantee, we understand that your final product may be the film you're planning to make in 3 years. So, in light of that, you can choose if you'd like to conclude your research project with either a written or verbal report to grant staff, or if you'd like to have a public sharing of findings. And I'll note that for research project mini grants that are not documentary, film, and media projects, the project must conclude with some sort of public sharing of the findings of your research. That could be, um, a webinar, it could be an exhibition, it could be a talk. Some people have written blog posts, that's fine, but just something that's sharing with the public what you learned from your research. So in terms of the mini grant timeline, there's no letter of intent required for mini grants, so not applicable. It's just the application. We do, like with major grants, offer staff feedback on application drafts. If you would like this, we just ask that you share your draft with us at least 2 weeks prior to the deadline so that we have a chance to review it and get you feedback in time for you to actually use the feedback. Like I mentioned before, we do have deadlines quarterly every 3 months, starting on November 1st, February 3rd, because February 1st is a Saturday, May 1st, and August 1st. And you'll hear back 6 weeks following each deadline, so by the middle of the following month, so a little bit quicker than major grants. So in terms of what you can use this funding for, it's really all eligible expenses that are related to the execution of the project because it's a project grant, right? So that includes project staffing, including salaries and fringe benefits. There are some caps on that depending on the kind of staffing, so check the grant guidelines. Project supplies and materials, marketing and promotional materials. If you're having an event like venue rental or other event related costs, printing and postage, if you're sending out postcards, for example. This is a change for this year. You can purchase AV or technical equipment or supplies of up to $10,000. So say you need a projector for your exhibition, you could purchase that as long as the cost was under 10,000. Travel and mileage, again, there are some caps and parameters on that, so check the grant guidelines. If you're doing a research project, research costs, so you need to buy books, if you need to pay copying fees at archives, that's fine. If you're doing some sort of digital project, or you need an exhibition website, the website hosting costs and software purchases. If you're making an exhibition and you need to fabricate placards and vinyl, that's fine. And also indirect costs. So that's really referring to anything that's supporting the project but isn't directly related to the project. So that could be admin staff that, whose activities just support your organization in general. If you're an organization with an office, your rent, things like that. If you don't have an agreement with the federal government, the kind of default setting rate is 15%. So you can spend 15% of the funds on indirect costs. Or if you have an agreement with the federal government, known as a NICRA, you could go with that rate. So it's pretty technical. If you have questions, let us know. And, there are more possible eligible expenses. So please check with us if you're not sure. And there's also, as I said, more details in the grant guidelines. In terms of what you can't spend project grant funds on, so this list is really mostly from the federal government. because again, these are federal funds and it's in the grant guidelines. So I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I did want to call out a few items that are, more complicated. So the first here is that we're not able to fund the creation of art or performances in the arts. So, maybe confusing or surprising, the arts and the humanities are often very intertwined and feed into each other and are often present in the same project. So really, what this is stemming from is that, like I said before, there's the National Endowment for the Humanities and the National Endowment for the Arts, and they're two separate agencies. So we're affiliated with the National Endowment for the Humanities, so it is not in our purview to fund creation of art or performances in the arts. That's in the purview of our sister council, Rhode Island State Council on the Arts. But of course, we understand many projects that we fund do have, creation of art or performances in the arts as parts of the project. So really, it's just that we can't fund those parts. So just being specific in your budget and in your scope about what Humanities Council funding would go towards is important, and making sure that it's going towards the humanities elements of the project rather than the creation of art or performances in the arts elements of the project. So one example of that, say you're a theater company, you're doing a production of a play, um, and then afterwards, you're planning to do a talkback discussion with the audience that has the director, it has a historian, it has a community leader talking about the historical context and themes of the play. We wouldn't be able to fund the production of the play, like the lights, the costumes, the actors. We could fund the talkback, right? Because that's the humanities content there. So if you have any questions, please reach out. Happy to talk to you about this. Another element is promotion that we are not able to fund is the promotion of a particular political, religious, or ideological point of view, advocacy for a particular program of social or political action, support of specific public policies or legislation, or lobbying. So again, this is federal funding, and the government does not want taxpayer money going towards funding political or partisan activities. So really we think about what we're funding as education and informed dialogue and debate among different points of view. And really core to us is the idea of humanities scholarship. We want what we're funding to be based in humanities scholarship and in kind of mainstream scholarly consensus. Obviously, scholarship has been politicized. This can get complicated or sensitive. But we really do look to that idea of mainstream scholarly consensus and, thinking about this as, and what we fund is education rather than advocacy. So we are not able to support projects that are really encouraging participants to take a specific action, to advocate for something specific, to vote a certain way, etc. So one example of this is that we can support a project that educates people about the history of voting in the US, encourages them to vote, teaches them how the legislative process works. We've done this before, but we couldn't support a project that encourages people to vote in a certain way or to contact their legislature to pass a specific bill or join a specific political march. So if you have any questions about this, please let me know. Happy to talk about it. Also just want to note that we're not able to support fundraising efforts. Often those have very specific points of view, trying to get people to do something specific, right? Give you money. So that is another place where humanities scholarship and the importance of that and kind of that scholarly perspective comes in. And then also just to flag, we can't fund retroactive costs, which are costs incurred prior to the project start date. So everything has to happen after an award has been given. So in terms of who is eligible, nonprofit organizations, first of all, and you must have 501c3 status or equivalent federal tax exempt status. So there are federal tax exempt statuses that are not 501c3. If you have one of those, great. but that you just have to have that. You also must have a unique entity identifier or UEI number. These are numbers that the federal government issues, and they're pretty easy to get. You basically go to sam.gov and register with them. It's brief. And these numbers are something that the government uses just to track where federal money is going and make sure it's not going to a foreign government or a terrorist organization or something like that. So we do have instructions on our website on how to register for that and let us know if you have any issues. If you're an individual applicant, as I've said, you can only register for mini grants or sorry, you're only eligible to apply for mini grants. If you do want to apply for a major grant, you do have to partner with a sponsoring nonprofit as a fiscal sponsor. Also eligible are municipal and state governments, including schools and libraries, and state, local, and federally recognized Indian tribal governments. Also, colleges and universities for programs beyond the campus community. We have more information in our grant guidelines about what kinds of college and university projects are eligible. We do accept applications from out-of-state applicants as long as the projects do have a clear Rhode Island connection and impact. And then all applicants must have a federal taxpayer identification number. So that could be a social security number, an employer identification number. There might be other kinds, but you do have to have that regardless of if you're an eligible individual or organization. Some other things to keep in mind, you can only have one major or mini grant open at a time. Some caveats with this or things to note. If you have a major or mini grant open and you'd like to apply for a major grant for the upcoming year, you can submit a letter of intent form, but you have to close your open grant by the major grant application deadline. So definitely contact us if you're in that situation. And if you're acting as a fiscal sponsor as an organization, you can have up to 2 grants open at a time, as long as at least one of them is a fiscally sponsored project. However, even if you are acting as a fiscal sponsor, each applicant can only submit one application per deadline. So there's no situation in which one applicant could submit multiple applications per deadline, even if they're a fiscal sponsor for one. We only accept one per applicant per deadline. Also, you must be in good standing with Rhode Island Humanities, meaning that you haven't had a previous grant terminated with us, and that would really be if you didn't finish your final report and submit it. If you're in that situation, you'd probably know, but if you have any questions, let us know. And you also can't be subject to our updated consecutive funding policy for major grants. So that's in our grant guidelines, check that out. But basically what that means is for our major grant program, if you're an organization that's received funding 2 consecutive years in a row through the program, you have to take a year off from applying. And then also just to note a few exceptions to our rule about what you are producing being free, open, and accessible to the public. If you're doing a K through 12 school project, we understand that you might just be doing a project for 5th graders in Bristol. And as such, you don't need to have that project open to the public. Also, something that comes up are museum exhibitions. You know, if we're helping to produce a new permanent exhibition, it doesn't mean that you always have to have free admission to the exhibition, but we would require that you have some free opportunities for the public to engage with it. And then, as I also mentioned, documentary, film, and media research grants. You can choose whether you'd like to conclude those with a report to grant staff or with a public sharing of findings. So I'll talk a little bit about what you'll find in the application. And like I said, there are PDFs of the application available online, so you can check those out. But just so you know, we've talked about humanities content and methods. We will ask you about the humanities content and humanities methods in your project. We'll also ask you about a humanities scholar. because we do require that all projects centrally involve humanities scholars to support the representation of knowledge from one or more humanities disciplines. So, humanities scholars contribute their expertise on humanities content and methods to projects. And we do know that and acknowledge that this expertise can be acquired in many different ways. So just to confirm, you do need to have at least one humanities scholar affiliated with your project at the time of application. So humanities scholars, they can have formal academic training, they could have advanced degrees in the humanities, they could have an affiliation with an academic institution. However, they may have also developed their expertise through lived experience or personal or community heritage. So that includes tribal elders, culture bearers, public humanities practitioners, and community historians. So, really, yes, we acknowledge that humanities scholars get their expertise in many different ways and accept that and celebrate it. And depending on your project's humanities content and methods, applicants should ensure that you've engaged humanities scholars who are culturally appropriate for your project and who have expertise in areas critical to the project. I'll also note that we do ask for a budget with every application, as you might imagine. We do require that in our template. So if you do require a budget, or if you do provide a budget outside of our template, we'll ask you for it in our template. So best to submit that off the bat. And I did want to talk a little bit about our cost share requirement. So this only applies to organizational applicants, although individuals are also welcome to demonstrate cost share. But for our organizational applicants, we do require a one-to-one cost share match. And this is really because we have a one-to-one cost share match with our money from the NEH. So for every dollar the NEH gives us, they require that we match it with $1 of funding from another source. So in terms of organizational applicants, matching funds are really kind of everything in your budget that wouldn't be funded by the grant directly. And that can be cash. It could also be in kind. So cash, I mean money from other sources. In kind, I mean items with market value that are donated to your project. So it could be labor, it could be an event space, so on and so forth, that has a market value attached to it, but you didn't pay for, was given to your project. So the total cost share, what the one-to-one means is that for every dollar requested from Rhode Island Humanities, there must be an equivalent dollar amount of dollars in your budget from another source. So if you're requesting $2,000 from us, there needs to be at least $2,000 from cash or in-kind cost share, and the total budget would need to be at least $4,000. So if you have any questions about this, please ask me, ask us, and also check out the grant guidelines. And then finally, also, documentary film and media applicants, your application is going to look a little bit different, and it's going to include a required work sample at the major grant level. For script development applicants at the major grant level, that work sample could be from the project you're applying for or applying with, but it doesn't have to be. For production and post-production level applicants, the work sample does need to be from the project you're applying with. So again, happy to answer any questions about that. So just a few FAQs we tend to get. Is there a standard timeline for a funded project grant? The short answer is no. Really, the only parameter here is what I mentioned earlier about retroactive funding, that we're not able to do it. So your grant period must start at least 6 weeks after the deadline. So it's after the award notification date. And then in terms of a project end date, that's really up to you. We allow you to set your own timeline. Usually, given the amount of money we give out, we don't tend to fund projects that take more than a year and a half, but that can change, for documentary films. Sometimes we're funding projects that take 3 years, 5 years. We understand that. And we're also happy to work with you on extensions. In terms of the letter of intent, I think I addressed these questions. No, it's not a letter, it's a form on our website. The letter of intent form is not binding, but it is required to submit a full application. In terms of how long responses to application questions should be, we actually have suggested lengths in our applications themselves. So take a look at that. Each question says what the suggested length is. It's really what we think, how much space we think you need to, or it's how much space we think it's possible to use to answer the question fully. You could do more, you could do less, but it's our suggestion. And then, no, we do not give any extensions on application deadlines, just to be fair to everybody. So make sure to get in your application by 11:59 p.m. the day of the deadline, and ideally earlier. So in terms of what happens once you submit a major or mini grant application, staff doesn't review applications, okay? So we're really here to help you put your strongest application forward and also to facilitate the whole process. The reviewers that review your applications are volunteer board members and compensated community reviewers. And we do our best to really make those review groups as diverse as possible in terms of race and ethnicity, gender identity, geography, background in the humanities, and so forth. We do our best to kind of curate those panels and to make them as diverse as possible. In terms of the review process, the mini grant review committees use the application review guide, which is a guide that goes question by question through the application and really steps you through what we're looking for in these responses. So they use those to go through applications, and then they use a form to submit their feedback and their rankings on each application. So ultimately, if it is a competitive cycle, meaning if we have more applications that we can fund, we will ask reviewers to rank applications in order of priority for funding. Major grant review committees go through this same process. Additionally, they then meet as committees to discuss applications and make recommendations as a group on those rankings. For final decisions, staff and board review all that feedback and the rankings from reviewers, and we reconcile those recommendations if we need to. So, good news, those reviewer evaluation materials I just mentioned are available on our website for the first time this year in order to help you in creating a strong application. So you can take a look at the application review guide and the feedback and ranking form. I recommend you do that so you can really see what our reviewers are looking for in those application responses. Also, just to recommend, please do read the entire application before starting to fill it out. I know sometimes you get excited, you're like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and fill this out, and you just plunge in. The risk there is that you spend a lot of time answering the first question and saying everything you want to say, and then you realize actually that's being asked 3 questions down, and maybe you didn't answer the question that was being asked in that first question. So take a look at the whole thing so you know what we're asking for where. And kind of to the other point I just made, make sure that you are answering the question being asked. Do be clear about the scope of your project so that reviewers know kind of what will be accomplished during that grant period by the project end date and how we'll know when it's done. Going along with that, does that project scope, project timeline, and project budget all tell the same story? So are they all referring to each other and do they make sense together? So ideally, when we get to the budget, you're asking for funding for all the things you've been talking about earlier in the application, and it's not entirely new elements of the project that the reviewers have never heard about. So, and also just thinking about, do you have the appropriate humanities scholars and partners committed to accomplish your project? So we encourage you to start early and to reach out to staff with any questions. If you are interested in applying, and we hope you are, you can go to our grant portal. That's the link directly, and that's the place you can apply for every opportunity with us, so not just these. And that link is linked on that major and mini grants page. So I've circled it there. You just click on apply for a mini or major grant. Okay, so to talk a little bit about Thrive, and this is a faster series here. So not as much, we won't spend as much time as we did with project grants, but it is a general operating support grant program. And as I said, the funding for it is from an allocation and a legislative grant from the state of Rhode Island that we're very grateful for. So the program is providing 22 general operating support grants of $5,000 each to eligible organizations, and we'll talk about who those are in a minute. And that is an increase from the first round of this program earlier in 2024 that offered 18 grants. And because it's a general operating support program, grant funds may be used for eligible expenses that are related to organizational operations. So, unlike for a project grant where it really the expense has to do with the project, this is really for the operations overall, or sorry, the organization's overall operations. So, in terms of who is eligible, this is a pretty specific program in terms of eligibility, a lot more narrow than our project grants. So, in order to be eligible for Thrive funds, organizations must fulfill the following four requirements. They must be located in Rhode Island and primarily serve Rhode Island residents and visitors. They must be a nonprofit registered with the state of Rhode Island. So, unlike with project grants, you don't need federal tax exemption. You just need to be registered with the state as a nonprofit. And you must fit the definitions of one of the two eligible types of humanities organizations for this program. And we'll go over those in a minute. You must either be a cultural heritage organization or a local historical and/or preservation society. And then you must also have a current annual operating budget of $150,000 a year or less. So this is for smaller organizations. And I'll just note that participation in any other RI Humanities grant-making program does not affect your eligibility for Thrive. So if you have a major or mini grant open, if you're thinking about doing that, that's great. And it's completely separate from Thrive, so it wouldn't affect anything in terms of your eligibility for the program. So to go a bit more into what these humanities organizations are, so we think of a cultural heritage organization as an organization whose mission and programs include a focus on the preservation, perpetuation, and promotion of heritage histories and or cultural practices and traditions representative of a particular culture and or people. And then we think of a local historical and or preservation society as an organization whose mission and programs are dedicated to the preservation, perpetuation, and promotion of a history and culture of a particular place. So really you kind of see these phrases, particular culture and or people and particular place. So these are organizations that are really focused on specific groups of people. So in terms of who is not eligible to apply for Thrive, so individuals cannot apply, for-profit organizations cannot apply, foreign entities, K through 12 schools, institutions of higher education, so that's colleges and universities, state and local government entities, and then any nonprofit that doesn't fit those four eligibility criteria we went over earlier. So if you do fit the eligibility, in terms of what you can use the money for, again, operational costs, so that includes staffing, rent and utilities, program supplies and materials, website and database development and maintenance, marketing communications, technology equipment, minor facilities repairs and or improvements, physical and digital accessibility improvements, and consultant fees. And this is just the beginning. If you have ideas for other things you'd like to spend the money on and they're not on the next slide, which is what you can't use it for, reach out to us and ask, and we can let you know. And just to confirm, there's no cost share or cash match requirement for Thrive Awards, unlike project grant awards for organizations, so you don't have to match the funding. In terms of what you can't use a Thrive Award for, again, this has to do with it being state money, right? So you can't, and this whole list is in the FAQs. I'll call out a few of these things, but definitely review the list. You can't use it for expenses unrelated to the operations of the grantee organization, for the purchase of land and or construction of facilities. So that's different than those minor facilities repairs and improvements that you can use the money for. Pre-award costs prior to December 13th, 2024. So again, can't use the funding retroactively. And again, because it's public funding, you cannot use it for the promotion of a particular political, religious, or ideological point of view, advocacy of a particular program of social or political action, support of specific public policies or legislation, lobbying, or political activities. So, in terms of the funding priorities for the program, this is a little different than last time we did the program. So, heads up if you're familiar with it from earlier. So like I said, we do have 4 more grants available this time than last time. We have 22 Thrive grants available of $5,000 each. So once the deadline passes and we've received all our applications, the first thing staff will do is review all applications for eligibility and also to determine new and returning applicant status. So new applicants are applicants who have not previously applied to the Thrive program. Returning applicants are applicants who have previously applied to the Thrive program. And if you've applied to Rhode Island Humanities to other programs like major grants, mini grants, any of our pandemic emergency relief programs, that doesn't affect your new or returning applicant status for this program. It's really just Thrive. So if we get 22 eligible applications and that's it, everyone would receive funding. Priority would stop there, right? We wouldn't do further analysis. However, if we have more eligible applicants than resources available, here's how we'll determine priority for the funding. So first up will be returning applicants whose previous Thrive application did not receive funding. So if your organization applied last March, you were eligible, but you didn't get funded, you're first in line this time. Next up will be new applicants, and priority will be given to, in that group, will be given to organizations where the communities served by the organization are reflected in organizational leadership, and organizations that are making efforts towards strengthening diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in their program services and operations. So new applicants will have questions that evaluate these 2 priority areas in the application. And a review panel similar to that major and mini grant review panel made up of volunteer board members and compensated community reviewers. We will compose that again with an eye to as much diversity as possible across different metrics. And there's more information about that in the Thrive FAQs. And then finally, last in line will be return applicants whose previous Thrive application did receive funding. So if you received funding from us earlier in 2024, we are so excited to support you. And because our priority is to get the funding to organizations who haven't received it, you will be last in the queue this time around. So if you want more information about all of this, please look at our Thrive FAQs. So in terms of the timeline, the application has already opened. It opened on September 16th, so it's live in our grant-making portal. Again, we will offer staff feedback. That's optional on an application draft. If you do want that, we ask that you share it with us and request that from us by October 8th. And then the deadline is October 28th, which is a Monday at 11:59 p.m. EST, like all of our deadlines. And then you'll hear back from us by December 13th, whether or not you receive funding. If you did receive funding, you will receive it in January 2025, and then you'll need to spend it by June 30th, 2025. So you have about 6 months to spend the funds. Just to share a bit more about what the application looks like. It looks a little bit different depending on whether you're a new applicant or a returning applicant, but you're going to access the application is the same regardless in terms of how you access it. So you go on our grant making portal, you click on Thrive, and then the application will ask you if you're new or return, and then it'll give you the right questions depending on your answer. So all applicants, regardless of if you're new or returning, must provide 2 authorized officials from your organization. So that's 2 folks that have legal and fiscal responsibility at your organization. So that could be your ED, your operations director, your board president, your board treasurer, basically anyone who can sign a check is another way to think about it. But you need two folks on the application who have that status. We'll ask for an overall summary of your organization's budget for your current fiscal year. So this is really documentation for that budget requirement of $150,000 a year or less. It can be one sheet of income and expenses, and there's some more details on that in the FAQ. Then we also ask for documentation of registration as a nonprofit corporation in good standing with the Rhode Island Department of State. That's basically you looking up your organization in the DOS's database and printing to PDF what you find in your entry. We have an example of that and instructions on it in the application and the FAQs. And then we'll ask you how you plan to use the funds if you do receive them. If you're a new applicant, we'll also ask you for your organizational mission statement, the communities you serve, and your organizational programs and services. And then you'll have to answer two narrative questions that assess those priority areas we talked about earlier. If you're a return applicant, you only have to provide those first three things if anything has changed since your last application. If it hasn't, you're good to go. And you do not have to answer the two narrative questions because you did in your last application. So if you're interested in applying, and I hope you are, you can do so in our grant making portal, like we've been talking about, same place as for major and mini grants, and that is linked on our website. Circled it, this button that says apply for a Thrive grant on the Thrive page. So if you do need help, we are happy to help you. So like I've said, there are a ton of resources on our website. So summary of all the updates, PDFs of all the applications, major and mini grant guidelines and Thrive FAQs, which should be the first place you look, PDFs of reviewer guides, forms, and rubrics. I didn't actually mention that, but for Thrive, the Thrive reviewer rubric is also online. Video of this information session that you're watching now, as well as slides. And then if we have any info sessions or office hours or anything like that, you'll find the links there. It's also literally our job to help you as staff. We are a resource as well, and please do take advantage of that. We do have drop-in virtual office hours on September 23rd and 30th. That's about a 2-hour stretch where you can sign up, and we spend up to 15 minutes with everyone who signs up, and you just drop in, and when we're ready for you, we will let you out of the waiting room and have a chat. We can also make one-on-one meetings with you depending on our schedules, so email us about that. But generally, we do just encourage you to contact us well ahead of the deadline with any of your questions and consider submitting your application for feedback per the timelines provided. And yes, we can only be as helpful as time we have to give you help. So do everyone a favor and reach out early. You can contact us, email us at grants@rihumanities.org, and also call us at the number listed there. So if you do receive a grant, that's awesome, and we're extremely excited for you. Congratulations. And I just wanted to let you know a bit of what to expect after that. So you must submit award paperwork to receive the funds. We'll give you that paperwork, fill it out. We cut you a check or send you an electronic payment, your preference. The funds must be spent and the grant funded activities must be completed by that project end date, which can change. So keep that in mind if you'd like it to. There is required reporting for all of our project or all of our grants. If you have a project grant where the timeline is over a year, you'll have to fill out an interim report, which is really a brief check-in to see if anything has changed and how things are going. All grantees do have to fill out a final report. And then there's resources and support from Rhode Island Humanities staff. So we're happy to help you get the word out about any events you have or spread the news on a website you've created, or if you need a thought partner to think through how things are going and see if we can make any connections for you or have any recommendations, we're happy to do that. So please reach out. And yes, please reach out. Also, if you do need to request any changes to your original project staffing, scope, timeline, and budget, especially since the pandemic. We understand that things change, adaptations are sometimes necessary, and we're more than happy to work with you. So please just reach out and we can sort whatever it is out. So that is our presentation for today. So thank you so much again for your interest in Rhode Island humanities and our projects, and can't wait to hear from you and to see your applications. Thank you.